Hello and welcome to our podcast at the channel. I am sitting here with Kalle Lundahl, and joining me over the net is Henrik Gustafsson. Most welcome to the episode of tonight. And we are going to discuss the Hopi Indian language and its connection to quantum physics.
Interesting subject.
Yes, David Bohm, the physicist, he created actually a language based on this language that David Bohm created had only verbs without nouns and so on, because Bohm thought that our Western languages were an obstacle to understand quantum physics, because quantum physics don't have objects and subjects in our sense.
No.
Instead, he thought that the real quantum word is like a verb. Our verb is a movement. And Bohm gave a language to this language, Reno language. And then later on, Bohm also met native Indians, native people in the America, and he discovered that they too they already had a language based only on verbs.
And today we met an Indian, a Lakota Indian named Tiyuka Sin, ghost horse over the net in Särö, and he mentioned that when he heard the natives speak, they made great pauses, and for every pause is like the implicit turned into the explicit. And somewhere there he realized there already are languages that are quantum physical. And apparently he should have torn his paper apart and said, we already have the answer. It's the Indian languages with verbs instead of nouns. There used to be a language theory when I studied linguistics called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And because Hopi Indian languages are so different, and that started the whole process with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, because everything is completely different. The direction is different. What we say starts with us doing something, starts in the other end. So they seem to like see the world bi-directional in a way. It was really hard to explain. I remember an illustration of two people fishing, and the Western thing would say the fish comes out of the sea, something like that. And I would say just the opposite. The fish came out of their mouths, then out of their hands, and then into the sea. And that's different, to say the least. And it doesn't come out of the sea. It comes in to what's out of the sea. And those things, one notices after a while, when you look at languages, in and out, left and right, those things are somehow interchangeable. And you want one of those things to be the starting point, the thing you forget, where you're sitting. This is where the whole thing starts. You tend to forget that. You notice when you look at these really odd languages, well, they could be made that way too. Then you realize our direction is not the only one, even though we assumes.
Hans, you gave me an idea. So in your comparison with the fish, so we think that the fish is obviously coming out of this lake.
Yeah.
While native people, let us say, would say that it comes from us to the sea. And if we apply this insight into the thought experiment surrounding cats, we could think that, let's say that the cat is in the sea. And so there is really no, we are, so to say, creating the cat in the native language, so to say. So because the cat or the fish is coming out of us into the sea.
Yeah, you can say that.
So it sees like a unity. It's
Yeah.
no separation. Well, why we stop with the separation? The fish is in the lake, separation. And then it comes to us. Okay, you have a unity, but so
Yeah. So a lot of things can be changed. And I know there's some languages where the act of giving, I give something to Kalle sitting here, I give him my mobile. That is extraordinarily complicated. It's not as easy as it in our language because they don't differentiate between different people and they don't have a clear conception of directionality. So we think it's very clear, I'm giving it to him. They don't have it. It's so different. It's so different. And it has to do with how we establish a point of origin, an origo, or something that we forget is reason for something else to exist, like the negative space around an object. We forget the negative space. And in Newtonian coordinate system, we forget that we never tell where the empty space is. How is it moving about? Not accordingly, we don't think about it. We just ignore it. We say it's stable. And when we say it's stable, we can say there's an object moving about inside the space, and we can change the coordinates. And we also have an origo somewhere, the cross point. And then you look at another language, and all of a sudden you get smack over the face and say, it could be different. It doesn't have to be that way. That's a refresher. That's like a cup of strong coffee that wakes you up in the morning. And you start thinking all you, and that gives a certain energy, because in this established pattern, it's a tiredness, it's boredom. It's the same thing all over and over again. And he mentioned that before. I went into the internet, saw some of his speeches. They are very inspiring. He's a good talker, this Tierkosin. I can really recommend him. It's very inspiring. There's a certain boredom in modern society. We lost the contact with nature and earth. But the surprise is that the fun stuff, the surprising things, because nature is ever evolving, ever showing up new things, whereas in the city life, the modern life, it's the same thing all over again. And people don't believe that. So there's new things coming out every week. And now we have Black Friday coming up here. But if you look at the fractals tell a tale of complexity. And we know that modern life is not that complex. It's lacking in complexity. It's the fractal number is way too low. And oddly enough, this woman who was there also.
a Maori.
Yeah. It was a Maori woman from Värmland of all places.
And she was there in person, not via Zoom. It was a Green Cross meeting.
Yeah.
And they had invited this Maori. She's actually a member of Green Cross. As far as I understand.
Was she in Värmland, you say? The country of...
She lives in Värmland, but of course she's from New Zealand.
Yes. She sang in the beginning of the meeting, and it was so strong, so the table was vibrating. Actually, I got a bit of a shock when I heard it first, but it was a very beautiful voice, but extremely strong. I wouldn't be able to produce a sound that strong. And that was goodbye, a Maori goodbye for some 2 members who died since last meeting, something like that. It was very emotional.
And she had a scarf
Yes.
with fractals.
Yeah.
With fractals, representing fractals.
And water is one of those most powerful fractal sources there is. And also Maori language is more oriented to action. They do have objects and subjects in Maori language, but it's much more action oriented still. It's interesting, the whole stuff.
I was thinking what you said about origo. I remember sometime we discussed the African language that had this. It had its origo in some kind of mountain. So even left and right and stuff was according to the mountain.
Yeah.
That's an origo.
Yeah.
But I have an idea what we should do. We should do like this. We should speak about the Schrödinger cat thought experiment, both with the Maori lady separately and then with the ghost horse, and see how they, so to say, how they would, so to say, interpret it.
That sounds like a very good idea.
Mm.
That can be very interesting.
Mm.
Present Schrödinger's cat first for this Irene, the Maori woman from Värmland and New Zealand, I presume, and then for this Indian fella. That'd be very interesting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I heard indications. There is a book written. We haven't found it out yet. It wasn't on Amazon apparently, where he is. He was partaking in that book. He's one of the co-authors. But it's very interesting. Would the Schrödinger cat pose a problem to or not? And I heard a lot of voices here. It doesn't, because they don't have existence as we do. If you're verb oriented, you are always directed to do something. So why would you have existence then?
But the verbs, do they bend them in like we do, past, present, and future? Or do they bend them in some other ways? Would you say?
Well, first, their verbs are much more extensive, and this could be very hard to start directly with the Hopi language. But I think I mentioned before, Ian McGilchrist, the author who recently came up with a new book. He writes about that from the beginning in antiquity in Greece, they were verb oriented. And that meaning in ex posterior, after we had the change, we would say that the object and the subject and the predicate and the adjectives were so to say baked into the verb. You can understand that as a programmer, Henrik. It was sort of baked into the object. You call it object oriented, and it could be taken apart, and you could later say the object was already there, because it was a little bit like he had a gaze, and that gaze was later explained to be a gaze for wanting some more gruel or some food. He wanted his gruel hot. That vision said all that, and later it became he saw the gruel that he wanted. So it gets more words. But from the beginning, it was just one word, describing the action, the intention. You see here now how the verb can be sort of translated into object, subject, adjective, and intention, and those things. Whether from the beginning it was only one word, probably a long word, but still only one word.
So they bake in like the causality chain, or
exactly.
The intention and stuff in the verb.
The
origin, its origin and its intention, and where it was headed.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Of course, we have to remember that we do that ex posteriori after the fact, and then we say that's always been an object and always been a subject. But as we know from quantum physics, that's not the right way to go about things. But of course, yeah, there is inbakat, as we say in Swedish.
Embedded.
Embedded, thanks.
Embedded.
And what happens, I would say, my take on the whole thing, I need to get the book first, but one thing I can think of, if you understand this better, maybe when you go into your ordinary language, you don't have to get so fixated on the object, the thing you want or the thing you crave or the thing you have in your head. You don't get so fixated with it.
Mm.
That fixation is actually obvious today. I read a couple of years ago, marketers, people, when they see huge advertising, they stay longer with the picture than they used to do. It doesn't leave them there. First, they look longer at it, and then it doesn't leave them. And that goes to show that we are getting a fixation to the objects, and unnecessary attention. It's a sort of strenuous attention.
I mean, the whole science stuff is like, here is an object, and we apply properties or qualities to that object. But here it seems to be reversed, that you have a verb or something happening, and you put attributes on what's happening.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Somehow that you
that's what
you stand in some kind of movement, or something is in action or whatever.
Yeah,
and you apply attributes on that. Instead of an object or something existing implicitly, and
But you can understand the thing. It's not too bad actually. It's like if you have the objects, you tend to have the objects static. They become changeable, and you yourself get fixated with them. As I mentioned with this marketing, people get fixated instead. They look too long at the marketing. The faces. It's the same with music actually. Today, tunes linger on longer. They don't leave the people who listen to them. And it's not hard to understand that is sort of painful. It's not very smooth. And it's actually caused, one could say it's caused by the verb, object, subject order. But it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe if you try the Indian language you learn the Indian language, I'm just hypothesizing. I don't want you to learn Hopi language. That would take like a lifetime, probably. But getting into it a bit more, I think that would loosen up this binding to the objects, that they have those. We're constantly looking for the predicates. We're looking for the properties in the objects. We're fixated. And we forget about the world.
And it's isolated from its surrounding.
Yeah, we isolate. Yeah, get fixated. The fixation is the problem. Get fixated. We got stuck.
So, like in the fish example that you gave earlier, so the fish, so to say, comes out of us.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like in a dream. In a dream, the opposites are inside you, so to say.
Yeah. Very good.
And quantum physics is like a dream.
Yeah.
So the objects, so let's say the cat is in the box, but while in Hopi, perhaps you think that the cat is actually, when he opens his eyes or their eyes, that the cat is coming from you, so to say.
Yeah, goes to say that if you have a Hopi language, the difference between dreaming, hoping, fantasizing, and reality, it gets blurred, obviously, because how can a verb get unreal somehow? It doesn't. Action can't. Action is an action. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter if it's an action in the dream. course, there's a degree, but in the Western society, we say everything in dream is completely unreal because the objects in the dream are unreal. Therefore, we say that's complete nonsense. Don't care about dreams. Whereas in Hopi, dreams are very important. They play an active role, so to speak. And oddly enough, that has something to do with their language. Isn't that weird? It's fantastic.
Yeah, because if you have had a nightmare and you wake up, you will act more in anger or something, probably, and that has its cause and origin of the dreams, etc. So it's interwoven in that way, maybe. I'm just
Yeah, it is. It's an action, and if we read like old stories from the Odyssey and Iliad and from other places like old China, they have a dream and they go out to attack the other country or they do something else. They take a boat trip and discover something, or they go into action and discover gold. I think in one place that's one dream. So they play a more active part, and you don't have this separatedness that the objects could create. I don't think you have to change your language. It's enough to understand that objects don't have to be that established, static, and superficial as well. Because whereas in Hopi, when they do have objects, they look into them. They are like open-ended. They have an insight. Whereas in Western culture, the objects are very flat. It's this central perspective. Almost like a photograph. When you slide it, it doesn't have a depth.
Perhaps we should wrap up here. It's getting late.
Yes, it's a good talk. We'll think about this.
Yeah, it's something to ponder about, isn't it?
Yes.
To stand on the verb instead of an object. To utgå ifrån.
To have our departure.
Yeah. I think verbs makes us more flexible. There is actually investigations, research into that. And there is a difference among Westerners as well. Everyone is different. Some people use more verbs in their language, action verbs, not so many intransitive verbs. And those people, they obviously are more action oriented, but they're less tense and they complain less about lack of energy, lack of stamina and all that stuff. So that I think that pinpoints that there's a lot of energy to be gained to have a more active language that doesn't dwell too much on the objects. And that was actually the conclusion from this marketing research, because it sounds like a good thing that people get fixated on the imagery they see on the big posters. There was some 2-3 decades when posters were still big. But the thing is, these people don't actually buy the products. They just get fixated on them. This sort of stops them from buying. They can get annoyed with them and don't even buy them. I think there was some advertising with this Nicole Smith, that's her name. That didn't work out because people got fixated on her instead. No wonder.
With the verb, you get interconnectedness, and you get you get a relationship to the outer world in a more fluent way, probably. Where you are a part of the world instead of looking at it.
Instead, just looking at it. Yeah, exactly. Passively, fixated on moving in the same origo, not moving about.
All right. Let's wrap it up. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kalle. Thank you, Henrik.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Kalle.
Bye-bye.
Bye.